I was standing at the head table when my father asked for a glass and everyone went quiet. He smiled like nothing was wrong and thanked the room for supporting the real family. People laughed softly, unsure I was still holding my place card. No one told him to stop. No one looked at me. My name was on the seating chart, but not in his speech. When he finally said it, he paused, corrected himself, and used someone else's instead. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I just stood there while the room decided. I wasn't part of it. I remember thinking even before that night that silence had become the language of my family. It wasn't loud arguments or obvious cruelty. It was something quieter, more controlled. Decisions made without me in the room, conversations. That ended when I walked in. My father called it keeping the peace, but it always felt like I was the only thing being kept out of it. It started years earlier after my father remarried. Suddenly, there was a new set of rules I didn't agree to, but was expected to follow. His wife had children, and overnight I was asked to adjust my entire sense of family around people I barely knew. I tried, I really did. I showed up when asked, I smiled in photos, I gave gifts I couldn't afford because it was easier than explaining why I felt uncomfortable being replaced in real time. But every time I said no, it wasn't treated as a boundary. It was treated as a problem. My father would call and speak, like disappointment had a tone. My mother would echo whatever. Kept things calm, and slowly I learned that being the easiest person in the room meant being the most invisible. The first time I noticed it clearly, I was 21. I had declined a family trip because of work exams. Nothing dramatic, just a simple conflict. My father didn't argue, he just stopped including me in future plans. I only realized it months later when I saw photos online of a weekend I was never told about. Everyone was there, even the people I barely knew. I wasn't. When I asked about it, my father said it had been last minute. My mother said I was too sensitive. And that was the pattern. Every absence had a reason that made sense to everyone except me. By the time I got engaged, I already understood my role. I was the daughter who fit around the schedule, not the center of it. So when I planned my wedding, I kept it small, careful, balanced. I told myself structure would prevent conflict. But structure doesn't matter when people believe access is automatic. The call that started, everything came 3 weeks before the wedding. My father didn't ask. He told me to change the guest list. His tone wasn't angry. It was certain, like the outcome had already been decided. I remember staring at my spreadsheet trying to calculate how love was supposed to be measured in seating arrangements. When I refused, the shift was immediate. Not loud, just final. I wasn't argued with anymore. I was simply removed from consideration, and that's when I understood something I had been avoiding for years. In my family, belonging wasn't something you had. It was something you negotiated every time you spoke. That night after the call ended, I sat in my car longer than I needed to. Not because I was deciding what to do next, but because I was realizing there was no version of this where I wasn't the one expected to adjust. I thought about all the times I had adjusted before, and for the first time I didn't call back. And then I understood that silence was no longer something I feared, it was something I could finally use. I didn't pick up when the phone rang the next morning or the day after, even when my mother tried again with softer words that used to work on me. Something had already changed in the way I saw their calls. I knew I was not coming back into it again. What I didn't understand at first was how long the pattern had been building before I ever noticed it. It didn't begin with my wedding. It didn't even begin with my engagement. It had been there for years, hidden under routines that looked normal, from the outside family dinners where I listened more than I spoke. Decisions made in group chats. I was added to late plans that somehow always finalized before I had a chance to weigh in. At first, I told myself it was just personality. My father was decisive. My mother avoided conflict. My brother followed whoever made things easier for him, and I was the one who asked too many questions. But over time, the pattern became harder to ignore. It wasn't just that I was left out of decisions. It was that my presence was only required when something needed to be fixed. If someone needed a ride, I was called. If someone needed money, I was expected to help. If someone needed agreement, I was reminded of family responsibility. But when I needed space time or understanding, the response changed. Suddenly, I was difficult, complicated, selfish. I remember one Christmas when I drove 2 hours in heavy rain just to make it on time. I brought gifts for everyone even though I was struggling financially that year. My father barely looked up when I arrived. My stepmother thanked me politely and immediately asked if I could help in the kitchen. Later that night, I overheard laughter from the living room, and my name came up only once. It wasn't even a conversation. Just a comment about how I always managed to show up eventually. That sentence stayed with me longer than the holiday itself. The truth was, I had spent years earning a place that was never actually secured. I was treated like someone on probation in their own family. Every action was recorded silently, not for understanding but for comparison. My willingness to comply was expected, my hesitation was remembered, and still I kept trying, because there were moments that made it feel like things could be normal again. A phone call where my father sounded proud. A rare text from my mother that didn't carry instruction. A shared joke at dinner that made me forget briefly that I was always slightly outside the circle. Those moments were enough to keep me believing that if I just adjusted a little more, I would eventually fit. But the adjustment never ended. It escalated slowly in ways that didn't feel dramatic until I looked back. Invitations became conditional. Conversations became shorter. My opinions were acknowledged, then quietly ignored. And every time I pushed back, even gently, I learned something new about my position in the hierarchy of that family. I wasn't equal. I was flexible. The breaking point didn't look like a breaking point at the time. It looked like a request, then an expectation, then a demand that carried the weight of disappointment behind it. And when I didn't comply, the reaction wasn't anger, it was erasure. That was the part I didn't see coming. That they would disagree with me, but that they would decide I didn't need to be included at all. And once that realization settled in everything, before it started to rearrange itself in my mind. The missed calls, the forgotten updates, the conversations. That stopped when I entered the room. None of it was accidental, it was consistent, and consistency, I realized, is its own kind of truth. The first time I fully drew a line, I didn't announce it. I didn't argue or explain. I simply said no and left it there. It was about the guest list again. A smaller request this time, framed politely, as if that would soften it. My father wanted me to adjust the seating, just a little to make space for people I barely knew. The same pattern, just wrapped in calmer language. Something in me didn't move this time. I remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't going to comply. It wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. The kind that comes after years of being expected to bend without question. I had nothing left to negotiate with. So I said, no. There was a pause on the other end of the line, like the word itself had interrupted something that was supposed to stop. Then came the shift. Not shouting, not pleading, just a quiet withdrawal of warmth. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. That sentence used to work on me. It used to make me adjust myself until things felt easier for everyone else. But this time I didn't respond, because I finally understood something simple. Harder for who? I asked. He didn't answer. That was the moment something irreversible happened, even if no one named it. The wedding planning continued without me being included in their version of it. I stayed in mine. I stopped checking my phone constantly. I stopped waiting for approval. That never really came. I focused on what I could control. The people who were actually showing up for me, but the pressure didn't disappear. It just changed shape. Calls started coming from different directions. My mother softened her voice in a way that used guilt instead of instruction. My brother called it keeping the peace. My aunts spoke like observers of a situation I was supposedly causing. No one asked me what had been requested. No one asked what I had already agreed to. They all spoke, as if the conclusion had already been written, and slowly I stopped defending myself, not because I didn't care, but because I realized I was explaining things to people who had already decided my role in the story. The final escalation didn't come from a conversation. It came from a message, 6 words. No discussion, no context, just a clean removal. You are no longer my daughter. I read it standing in a quiet room, holding the edge of a counter like it was the only stable thing left. I expected shock, or tears, or something dramatic that matched the weight of it. But what came instead was stillness. Not peace yet. Not clarity, just the absence of confusion. Because for the first time, the pattern made complete sense. It had never been about that one request, or that one wedding, or even that one disagreement. It was about control disguised as connection. And when I stopped participating in it, the connection ended. Not slowly immediately. And that realization didn't break me. It steadied me after the message everything. Moved faster than I expected, but quieter than I imagined. There was no dramatic fallout at first, no confrontation in person, no final family meeting, just a series of calls and messages from people trying.